Welcome, everyone. Hope you're all having a great day. Thank you so much for joining me today for my 8th webinar this year. Um, Today we're doing something a little different. Instead of just watching me edit photos, today I'm going to show you some of my tips and tricks on creating some textures of your own. So today, since as usual, and as it says here, I have my notes for sale. We're going to do two things different. In the notes, because we're not using as many original images, we're creating things from scratch. I'm also going to give you the 6 textures that we create in this first project, as well as other textures used and images like normal. And we're also going to do something else special, and I'll talk about this again at the end. But anybody who buys the notes between today and Thursday at midnight Eastern time will go into a drawing for, I'm going to award 2 prizes, and both will be for an hour of personal training with me. So if you're interested in that, make sure to get the notes, and in that training we can go over anything you want. As long as I'm able to help you, I definitely will try, whether it's Photoshop, Lightroom, textures, Topaz, whatever. So we'll talk more about that at the end of the day. I think we have a question already. I'm at the bottom. Somebody has a question about Luminar. Let's see, things are okay. Question about the Skylum and Luminar product that I've used in the last couple of webinars. The person, Susan, wanted to know if the sky replacement is included in Luminar 4. Yes, it is. That is part of the program. And I'll talk a little bit more about Luminar, I'm sure, as we go along. I don't think I use that too much today. But definitely that is included in there. And if you've been following the blog, you'll know that Luminar is coming out with a new product in their anticipating release right around the holidays in December. And that's going to be Luminar AI. It's not going to be an upgrade to Luminar 4 because it's using a lot more of the AI technology. We've had some webinar calls with the affiliates that I've been able to sit in on, and as good as Luminar 4 is, this is going to just totally blow your mind. So keep watching the blog for more details as that comes up. I don't even have a copy to work on yet. They're anticipating us getting a copy in November sometime, so we can play a little bit and I can do some samples and show you guys more of what it can do. But just watching them using that at the corporate office is quite impressive, and I think you'll all be pretty amazed. Alrighty, so enough of the commercial. Let's get to working. So let me close this guy. So today, instead of starting with an image, you can see I was playing with some peacock pictures before. We're going to start with a new blank document. So we're going to go up to the top and we're going to do File, New. And when I'm making textures, I like to work with 15 inches by 15 inches. And you can set your own presets here. Once you set it, you can save it as a preset for yourself. So we're going to do 15 inches by 15 inches, 300 DPI. I work in RGB color. You only need to do 8-bit for textures. You don't really need the 16-bit technology. And we're going to start with a white background. And then I'm just going to say create. So normally I don't have to change anything. I just can double click that and it's going to open my new blank document right up. So everything, as I usually do, we're going to do on separate layers. I want to note too, everything we're doing today can also be done in Elements for all my Elements users out there. So tools may be in a different place. You know, you have the photo bin rather than the tabs at the top, but the processes are the same. Alrighty, so we've got our layer. I'm gonna, hopefully you can see my cursor better. I've changed it to this green one. So when it's not in the workspace of Photoshop, you get this bright green cursor. So down here, I'm gonna hit the plus sign for add a new blank layer. We want a transparent layer. We want every brush we're going to use on a separate layer, and you'll see why as we go along. Alrighty, so for this one, we're going to select a brush. So I'm going to go over to my brush tool. I'm going to click on my brush menu. And for this one, I'm going to use a Photoshop built-in brush. And it's if you go under Legacy Brushes, and then we are going to the Faux Finish brushes. For this one, I'm going to use Stenciled Sponge. I'm reading my notes. Stenciled Sponge Dry. So we're going to start with that one. So I'm going to double click that. And then I'm going to change my foreground color. And for this first project, we're going to work with tans. So I have the number written down because I've done this before, but you would normally just, click around in here and find a color you want to start with. I like to work with, start lighter and then work to the darker colors. So I'm going to say, okay, so that's my color. And then I'm going to make this brush, it's right now, the default size is 65 pixels. I'm going to use my right hand bracket key, and I'm going to just make this brush bigger until it gets to 1700. I like to work larger brushes as well. And then when we're doing this kind of work, we want to make sure our opacity of the brush is at 100% and the flow of the brush. We can always lower the opacity if we wanted to later, but you can't increase it. So it's better to start with it at full strength, and then we can always reduce that opacity later if we need to. Alrighty, so now I'm just going to start clicking. And every time you do this, it's going to look different. You're going to see different patterns depending obviously on the brush, but also how much you click around the area. So even though I've done these before, and quickly I can show you what the finished product is going to look like. So you can kind of see where we're going with this. So that's what we're going to end up with, is something like that. But obviously it's going to look a little bit different because I may click the brush in a little different way. Do we have a question, dear?
We have two questions.
Okay.
How do you get legacy brushes, and how do you organize your brush?
Good question. And at the end of this project, I'm going to show you all about getting brushes from Photoshop and organizing them for when I actually have a brush organizer. It's called Brushbox, and I need to get this set up. I just got this one recently, so not everything is in here because I have so many brushes that are not loaded into this. So if you've got tons of brushes like I do, there are some plugins that you can get. When I go up to my menu here, they're just in the order that I've added them. You can move them around, but sometimes it defaults back to its own thing. Like I grouped all of my own brushes together when I was in here the other day, but actually it looks like some of them moved. Anyway, so they kind of have a mind of their own. But the legacy brushes are, it comes with Photoshop. So you have general brushes, which are like your round brushes, and then legacy brushes is in the newer versions of Photoshop CC. In the old one, they were just all under general brushes. But now in the last couple versions, they've created this legacy brushes, and then they're broken down by styles. So you would just, go look through the different styles. Okay. All right, so we have our first layer done, and I want coverage, but I don't want it to be, crazy covered because we are going to be adding 2 more layers. I like to work with 3 layers when I do textures. I just think it gives it a nice depth to the color. All right, so we've added a new blank layer because we want to be on a separate layer for our next one. This one I'm going to go in and use, let's see, where am I going? Into the back to the faux finish brushes, which was here. And this time I'm going to use C Sponge 1. So I'm going to just double click that. I'm going to change my color to 766634. And I want to make this size about 1400 pixels. So once you start using the bracket key, it starts increasing it in 100 pixel increments. And then for this one, I'm also going to change the brush so that it's not always in the same position. We can change the brush in the brush settings panel. So you would go to Window, Brush Settings, and it will open up this panel. And we can change how this brush reacts as we go. So we're going to be working first with we want to work with the shape dynamics. Okay, so we're going to click on that line. Even though it's checked, you have to click the line to get the control panel here. I'm going to change the size jitter to 20%, which means not every stroke is going to be the exact same size. It's going to vary either 20% bigger or smaller. The angle jitter, I'm moving to, and I just kind of moved these around till I could see things happening down here. I went to about 37%, and that's going to change the angle of the brush. So you can see now it looks like a diamond shape. So sometimes it will be in one direction and then it's going to vary. Then we're also going to click on the box for scattering and click that line to highlight it. And I'm going to change the scatter to 211%. The count jitter, we're going to change to 17%. And then the last one is the box for color dynamics. So it's going to fluctuate the color of the brush a little bit. And we're going to change the saturation jitter. So some will be lighter and some will be a little bit darker. And we're just going to vary that a little. So you can kind of see in this box down here how things are going to vary from the original. So we'll just close that. And now we're going to start clicking. And you can see how the brush angle is changing. I'm going to scroll back just a little so I can get to the edges too, because you want to make sure you grab those edges. And I kind of do a pattern, but I try not to be too predictable. And if you get too much dark in one area, you can do a Control Z and just undo a stroke if you don't like the way it looks. You know, if it gets a little too overlapped, you can always back up and do that. All right, that looks pretty good. Like I said, it's going to be different every time. You could use these same brushes and do this several times and end up with something different each time. So that's our second layer. So I'm going to add one more layer. And this time, let's see. I also decided that this one, darker layer, I decided to try dragging this below our first layer. And you can see you get a little more of the lighter color, so it lightened up the whole texture. And sometimes I like it that way and sometimes I don't, but it's something you can also play with, and we're going to leave that for this one. So for our third layer, we're going to use color 614 F18. And then I'm going to go pick a different brush. Sometimes I use the same brush for all of them. This one I decided to vary it a little. I'm going to use Sea Sponge 2. And we're going to make this one 1200 pixels. And we're going to go back to that brush settings panel. I have the icon over here, so I can just open it here. But if it's not open, you can do the window. But you can also save some of these to this little panel over here that you use all the time. So we're going to go back to the shape dynamics, size jitter 35, angle jitter 41, and scattering, I'm going to do 407 or so %. That's good. That works. Alrighty. So also what I like to do when I get to the third layer, sometimes it's hard to see when you start stamping if you've covered everything. So you can also hide the first two layers you did, just so you can make sure you get a good coverage on your layer. And then we can turn them back on when we're done. And just, again, you know, you don't want it to really have a pattern to it, so you want to be as random as possible, which helps when the brush is moving as well. And that looks good, so we can turn these two back on. And then I also brought this layer beneath the other one to see how that looked. So we have, rather than the darkest color being on top, we have the lightest color on top, so it gave it a little more variation, I think, in the color. So now, because our background is white, we can also change that. And you could always save it as is, as this version with a white background, and then create one with a colored background. So we're going to choose a color C2B07A. And I like to go with a really light color just to fill it in so it's not white. And the keyboard shortcut to fill the layer with color is Alt Backspace. On a Mac, that's Option Delete. And I think that's a little heavy yet. And actually what I didn't do, I'm going to undo this for a second. I should have added a blank layer above this as well. And the reason is when I, oops, wrong one, Alt Backspace. Actually, that looked kind of cool too. Because I want to lower the opacity of this layer now, if it wasn't white down here, it would just become transparent. And I can show you that if I turn that off and I lower this to like 60%. You can see it has that kind of transparent grid behind it, where if it's white, it just lightens the color without it becoming transparent. So it's always good to keep that white layer beneath it. So this is texture number 1. And you can see by the one that I created before how different they are, even though I use the same colors and the same brushes. That's the kind of variety or variation that you can get when you create them. So yours may not look exactly like mine, but that's okay. Yes, dear.
They want people ask how you add the groups already. I keep telling them they're going to do it at the end of the segment, but it's all.
Yeah, I'll cover how to add brushes and where to get some more when we're done with this set of textures. Okay, so let me close that one. So this is our new one. So I'm going to save this as tan 1A. Okay, and I would save it first as a TIFF file because I want to be able to reuse these layers, and I'm going to show you that in a second. And then save it as a JPEG because you're going to want the JPEG version when you drag it in to use it as a texture. Okay, so you want to save it as both. So we're going to continue with this one now, and I want to change the colors. And I want to create, well, actually, before I change colors, sorry, I'm going to blur this one. So there's two ways you can do that. You can either take the JPEG and blur it all at once, or what I decided to try with this one, and I hadn't done this before, was I'm going to blur each layer individually. So I'm going to click on this first layer, and I'm going to go up to Filter, Blur Gallery, Field Blur. You could also use a Gaussian blur. I've been trying this one lately, and I kind of like the results a little better. And I'm going to take this up to about 100 pixels. So you can see how it's starting to soften this texture, and then we'll say OK. All right, I'll get to it in 1 second. Somebody asked if I recommend saving as a TIFF versus a PSD. I prefer the TIFF format only because if I want to take this file into another program like Affinity or On1, or if you use any of the other programs, they would not recognize a PSD. A PSD is proprietary to Photoshop, so other programs cannot read a PSD file. The other reason that I like it, and I'm going to drag over my other screen for a second, if it's a TIFF file, you can see it here in your Windows browser, and a PSD file would just end up with the icon there. It wouldn't show you the picture. So that's another reason that I like it. But mostly it's because a TIFF file can be used in other programs. Okay, so that's layer 1. So layer 2, I'm going to click on this one, and I'm going to do the same thing. Filter, blur gallery, field blur. And we're going to take that also somewhere around 100. Say OK. And then we'll do it to the third layer once it finishes doing its thing. Sometimes it takes a few seconds because these are large files and we're doing lots of stuff in there. Sometimes it gets slower than others. Okay, so now we're going to go back to our last layer and do the same thing. Filter, blur gallery, field blur, and blur it there and say OK. And once that one's done, and come on, I need my Jeopardy music playing. All right, come on, hurry up. There we go. So now we have a blurred version. So if you wanted to use it as a soft bokeh in the background, you can have the separate version. Also save as a TIFF file and then save it as the JPEG file for bringing it in to your work. So I'm going to close this one since I already have these saved. And I'm going to reopen the TIFF file of the first one I created. This is the one I previously created. So we have our same thing, our layers like we just did, our tan color. But now say we like this texture, but I want it to be green instead of brown. Well, we don't have to redo all of the brush strokes. We can just change the color of each layer. So first we're going to click on layer 1 to make that active. I'm going to choose a new foreground color. It's 5FA477. So I'm going to go with a light green. And now there's two ways we can change this color. So we have brush strokes on here. So that some pixels have color and some are still transparent. If I just do the way I did down here, I'm going to move to the move tool just to get rid of that icon. If like we did this layer with the Alt backspace, if I did that now, it's going to fill the whole layer, but I don't want to fill the whole layer. I only want to fill the pixels that have color. So there's two ways we can do it. If you like the keyboard shortcut, hold down the Shift key when you do the Alt backspace, and you can see, let's turn these two off so you can see it better. And it's only the green pixels. And the other way you can do it is hit this little lock button above the layer that locks the layer, and then when you do the Alt backspace, it only fills those pixels. So either way does exactly the same thing, whichever you prefer. So I'm going to turn on my second layer and highlight it, and we're going to use color 387 C50. And same thing, I'm going to do the Shift Alt backspace. Then we're going to turn on layer 3 and change that color to 1E5331 and Shift Alt backspace. And then we're going to change our background color to 759E84. A real light green. And now this time we can just do the Alt backspace because we're filling the whole layer. So just like that, we now have a green texture that looks like the brown one. And you could blur this one as well if you wanted to, or you could take the blurred one and, because we saved it as a TIFF, just change the colors of that one. You could create a blue one, a red one, a pink one, whatever you wanted to do. You could have a whole library from that one texture. So now we're going to do some other cool stuff with this texture. So that's 3 versions. We're going to do 3 more things with this same texture. So now I'm going to close this because I already have it saved. I'm going to open the JPEG version of the first texture. So this one is flattened. Okay. And I'm going to duplicate my layer because I always do that. And this time I'm going to use some Nik Filters to create something cool. So I'm going to open up my Nik panel and I'm going to go into Color Effects Pro. And the one I liked was under the ink category. And there's a drop down over here with some different types of colors. So I went with number 2. And I changed the strength is 80, that's fine. Highlights, where am I at? Strength 80, highlights 100. I don't think that's the one I used. I'm gonna have to double check that because that doesn't look like the one that I created. It's a little different. Let's see, did I click on the wrong thing here? Oh, that would be why, because it didn't highlight ink. I'm like, that didn't look like the one I created before. Okay, so that's obviously way bright. So that's why I moved, the strength is 80, and then I moved the highlights all the way over to 100. And actually it's the shadows I think we want to move. So we're gonna mess around with these, so it's the shadows I want to move. So I've lightened it up a little bit. And then we're gonna go say okay, and that's gonna take us back to Photoshop. And then I'm gonna add another Nik layer, and I could have done the 2 together, but sometimes I change my mind and I like things on separate layers. And this time we're going to use the one called Old Photo, and we're going to select number 2. So we're going in a totally different direction here. And it's going to be just, this kind of gives you a look of, I'm going to say, okay, to go back to Photoshop. And it's like a antique paper kind of a look. So that gives you a completely different texture. So you could, if you like the orange one, you could always just lower the brightness of that and save that version. And then I really liked this one. I did add a hue and saturation adjustment. And I'm going to bring the hue over a little bit and saturation I upped a little bit. And then I brought the lightness down just a smidge. So we have this kind of off-white, peachy looking kind of paper. So again, you could go ahead and save that if you wanted to. So that is our 4th version. And actually that's our 3rd version, sorry. So from here, we're going to create even more. So I'm going to open the one I already have saved. That's a JPEG of this, because then I'm going to take it into Topaz and create some more versions. So again, save it as a TIFF, and then save it as a JPEG. Yes, sir. Yes, I will try and remember to give the Mac commands.
I said sorry, but you try to remember.
I forget sometimes. Alrighty, so now we have this version. We're going to duplicate that background layer. And we're going to open up our Topaz Studio. And we're going to do a couple things in here. So I'm going to go into Add a Filter. And I'm going to use Abstraction. And again, you can try all different kinds of filters and settings, and you could just have an endless supply of textures from that one that we created. So I do simplify size. I'm going to do feature boost. And these are all to taste. This is, trial and error, just the settings that I came up with while I was playing around in here. And we'll say okay and go back to Photoshop. Now I saved this as a JPEG, but I'm going to leave it open because we're going to add another filter on top of this. So do a Control J or Command J and copy that layer and go back to Studio. And this time I'm going to add an impression filter. So we're going to give it a little bit of a painterly look. Add filter, impression. Somebody asked if you don't have or want to use Nik, can you use Photoshop adjustment layer, hue, saturation? Never mind, you just answered my question. Yes, you can. A lot of these things you can manage to do in Photoshop. I just happen to have these other products and I use them all the time. So you can, play around, but if you don't have Nik or Topaz or whatever, play around with different filters in Photoshop. Photoshop has a lot of filters built into their menu as well, and there's lots of different effects that you can create. So I'm going to change this to brush 16. I went with a high number of brush strokes, and then we're going to make some changes here to stroke rotation. So again, it just makes the brushes move around just like when we were in Photoshop. Rotation variation, stroke color variation, stroke width. I went up a little bit there. And the stroke length. And then I'm going to come down to the color tab. And I changed the overall lightness. I darkened it just a little to a minus. About minus 10 or so. Alrighty, and then we can accept that one. And that is version number 6 of all of these textures we've been working on. You can see that there's some variations in color in there because of the settings we use, but it has a little more painterly look. So now how do we use these textures now that we have them? So let's close this one because I already have it saved. I won't save it. I'm going to open up an image and we're going to apply a couple of these textures. And in case you were wondering, some people don't know that I have 2 monitors. So when I double click the photo from the other monitor, that's why it's opening in my Photoshop. Otherwise you would go to File, Open, and go to your folder to get your picture. So that's why I'm doing it that way. And I also will drag textures from the other screen. Just here. How did I change the color of my cursor? It is under Edit, Preferences, and then it was under Cursors. So you go under your Preferences menu, and then in here you can change, let's see, which one was it under? It's not actually in Cursors, even though it's Cursors, but it's in one of these menus in here. I don't remember off the top of my head now. I did it the other day, but it should be somewhere in this preferences menu. If you can't find it, shoot me an email or a message and I will try and find that again for you. But yeah, it does make it easier when you're doing some of this stuff, especially online. All right, so I'm going to bring in the first texture we did, and again, I'll do it this way. I'll do File, Open, so you can see how to apply it if you don't have 2 screens. And you can change the view of this as well. So you can see these are all the ones we just created, or actually created before. So I'm going to open 1A, was the first one we did. I'm using my Move tool. I'm going to grab the tab for this texture and pull down, and when I let go you can see them side by side. If you're in Elements, you would have both things open from in the photo bin at the bottom, and I'm going to, in Photoshop, I'm going to click inside this texture, click, hold, and drag. If you're in Elements, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to grab the texture from the photo bin, click, hold, and drag it up. And it will show up like this on a separate layer above your image. I'm going to scroll back. You can see the edges of it. I'm going to hold down my Shift key and I'm just going to resize it to my photo and hit Enter. And Control-0 or Command-0 makes it fill the screen. Hang on, I just knocked down the mouse pad wrist rest that I have here. Okay. So now we have our texture over our image. So then we work with blending modes and opacities like we always do with textures. This one I went with overlay and I brought it down just a little, about 90%. And then I'm going to add a second one. I'm actually going to add one of the other ones we created, the one we did with the abstraction. I'm going to bring that one. I'm going to dragging this one from the other screen, but it does the same thing. It's just faster. I love working with two screens. I could never go back to one. And with this one, we're going to change the blending mode to multiply and bring it down about 50%. So you can see without that second texture, it's a kind of a cooler tone, even though it's a little warm down here, but with this one, it just gives it kind of that golden hour, kind of a glow. So that is how you would apply some of these textures. Alrighty, time is flying by. So how do we get more brushes for Photoshop and install them? So let me just open a new document because you need to have something open so you can see your brush menu. So if you go, and this, like I said, to get these extra brushes only applies to Photoshop CC. So once you click your drop down, if you go up to the gear wheel, there's a Get More Brushes. That's going to take you right to the Adobe site. And if you scroll up, there are a bunch of different brushes that you can download for free. So let's do a set. I know I have one of these installed. Let's try the watercolor. So you're just going to say download. It's going to download. If you're on Chrome, it'll show up down here, but it will go to your, let me bring this back over. It's going to go to your downloads folder automatically. There it is right there. So you just need to know where it is. And then to install it, you're going to go back up to the brush menu, click on the gear wheel, import brushes, and then you're going to go to, in this case, that downloads folder. There's the brush set we just did, and you want, it'll be an ABR file, and you're going to click it and load, and it will add to the bottom of your menu, and there it is. So those are the ones that we just imported. So there are a ton of brushes. This happens to be, these watercolors, there's like a huge number of different brushes in here, and these are great for textures as well. I haven't really played with them much. I just got this one the other day myself. But yeah, there's a ton of things in here that would make some awesome textures. Another way to get some brushes, of course, I create brushes as well, and I have some in my store. And in the note, I can't talk. In the notes, I have a few of my other favorite sites. And you know, if you get my blog, on Tuesdays I do Around the Web. So when I find freebies or good deals on, you know, different bundles and things, I list them. One of my favorite brush designers is Group Brushes. So I'm going to just open a new document again. And with his brushes, he actually has this little panel that you can install. So when you open that, you just see his brushes. You don't have to go through the Photoshop panel. And when I first discovered these are actually designed for digital painting, but I thought they were pretty cool, and I tried some of them. And the gentleman's name is Nikolai, who designed these. He's in Canada. I showed him one of the textures I created, and these are actually, these hatch ones work really good for textures. So I'm going to click that and make this bigger because they usually start out small. we'll use that color just so I can show you what they do. His brushes are designed to automatically change sizes and size and direction, so you don't have to worry about setting hue and jitter and that kind of stuff. He has these designed to automatically do that randomly. So you could add another layer. These make some awesome textures, and a lot of the ones that I have in my store I did make with some of his brushes. I do have a discount code on my website. You can save 15%. His prices are very, very reasonable for his products. So some of the other sites I like are, and these are, some are usually freebie. One I use a lot is brusheezy.com, BRUSHEEZY. There's a ton of stuff on there that you can get for free. The free ones are personal use only, so just be aware of that if you're doing commercial projects. Brushlovers.com is another good one. They also have patterns, textures, clip art types of things, and check the terms of use on there. Another one for brushes, patterns, and textures is F, like in Frank, brushes.com. And there's a bunch of good stuff on there. Alrighty, so that's those. So another way you can create textures, and let me get back over here to my folder, is to take a photo and modify it. So this particular one that's opening up, this is a photo of wallpaper in a hotel. Hotels are great places to find textures, I find. You have different wallpapers, rugs, curtains, bedspreads. There's all kinds of cool patterns when you go to hotels. Not that we've all been doing that much lately, but when we get back to traveling, you can find some cool textures. So there's a few things we could do to this one. I'm going to show you a couple of versions. So we're going to duplicate our background layer. And then we're going to add a new blank layer. And then we're going to click on that foreground color picker again. And I'm going to use a green, but a slightly different green. So 209C4C. And I'm going to fill this layer with color. So I'm just going to do the Alt backspace. And then I'm going to change the blending mode to overlay. Yes, dear.
Are these brush sources strictly for Photoshop?
Are these instructions for Photoshop?
The brush sources.
Oh, the brush sources. No, most of these brushes, other than the ones that are from the Adobe site that are only if you have Photoshop CC, all the other sites, ABR brush files are usable in any program that uses brushes. So if you have Affinity on one, probably even GIMP, Elements, the ABR files are a universal file for brushes. So pretty much any program that I know of will use those. So you don't have to have Photoshop other than to get the free Photoshop stuff. If somebody wanted to know the name of the group brushes, let me type that. Okay. It's groupbrushes.com. And Nikolai is the gentleman. He's a very nice guy, young guy. All right, so we've added a green color and changed the texture just by doing that. We can also, then we can save that as a TIFF and as a JPEG. To save time, I'm just going to flatten this. I don't normally do that, but I want to then show you we can do our Control J. Go in and do a blur on this one. So this time, let's try the Gaussian blur. And we're going to do about 40 pixels. Actually, I think I ended up coming back a little on that. 40 was a little much. Let's come back to around 30. That'll be good. So now we have some blurred branches to maybe put in the background of a flower photo or something else, or overlay, you know, with the background of something else. So that's another way we can modify it. Another way we can do this is, let me go back in my history to my black and white version to save time. Control J. We can add a gradient the way we added the green before. We're going to go over here on the left panel to the gradient and then click up here at the top. And these are laid out slightly different in different versions of Photoshop and Elements. I noticed in this latest version of Photoshop, they show them all grouped together, all the different gradients. And then if you come down, they have them broken up by colors and styles, where it used to be you only had different groupings. So I kind of like the way they have this now. So I'm going to work in, actually it's the greens. So I'm going to work in this group. I like this green to blue. My thought was blue sky, green grass. So I'm going to click that one. But now the gradient goes from green to blue, which means if I drag down, it's going to go green at the top and blue at the bottom. I want the green at the bottom. So I'm going to place my cursor at the, at the base of the image. And if you hold down, once you click down here, if you then push the shift key, it will let you draw a straight line, and you can just draw straight up to the top. And when you let go, there's your gradient. Again, changing the blending mode. This time we're going to change my page of my notes. We're going to change this to overlay. And then I'm going to leave the opacity, but you could bring that down a little bit if you wanted it to be a little more subtle in the color. So now you have something else that you can use in the background of it, of, you know, another photo.
Can you show someone how to make a texture from the photo?
Say that again, dear. I'm going to show you another version in a sec. Somebody wanted to know if I could show how to make a texture from a photo. Well, this is from a photo, but I'm also going to show you how you can modify a photo into a texture. That's our next and last project. So hang on for just a moment. So you could also blur this one if you wanted a blurred version of that. So there's just so many different things you can do. It's really, you could just sit and play all day and make textures. So let's make a texture from a texture. So this is an image. Yes, dear.
Show Carol Broden how to download the brushes into the photograph.
Okay. I will show again how to do the downloading brushes in a moment. Somebody wanted to see that again. Okay, so this particular image is rust. It's peeling paint on an old car, which you know I love to photograph, which makes great textures as is. But we're going to turn this into something that you won't even believe came from this image. So we're going to duplicate our background image, and I'm going to use Topaz to do this. And I love Topaz impression for creating textures because it can do so much for an image. Alrighty, so we're in Studio, add a filter, go down to impression. I'm going to use brush number 9. I want the number of strokes low. And that just means there's less paint strokes, so they're like bigger. All right, now we're going to do some setting changes. So let's scroll down here. Brush size. And I'm going to type these in because it'll be faster. And I have the numbers, so 0.10. Paint volume, and you're going to see it change as I tab. You're going to see this thing happen. 0.15. Paint opacity, 0.36. Stroke rotation, 0.07. Rotation variation, 0.23. Color variation, 0.20. Stroke width, 0.33. Stroke length, 0.28. Smooth down. Spill, 0.72. Smudge, 0.31. And coverage, we're going to leave at 1. Then we're going to go into the lighting tab and change my brightness to 0.13. Highlights minus 0.18. Shadows 0.24. Now that looks different. So again, sometimes these things get different every time. I think I want to change the spill. I think that's where it changed it. It's amazing how different each time you do these things are. They don't always come out exactly the same, but that's why it's fun to just play around. I'm going to add some more smudge there. And I will show you the one that I completed that came out even different than this. But again, it's cool to play around, and you're going to still create something really neat. So we're going to say, okay, go back to Photoshop. And that looks completely different than the other one I created. So I'm going to open up the other one. Even though it was the same settings, it's just the way, because the programs are actual painting programs, that's what I ended up with after the first one. So it didn't even look like it came from the Rust. And there were just a couple of little spots that were darker, and I just used the clone tool. There was a couple little tiny spots in the middle that were, a little darker, and I just cloned those. Let me open the TIFF file of it. You can see the layers. Okay. So that was, that was where I did some cloning and healing. So you can see that was what it came out from Topaz. Completely different than that one. It's weird. And I had created something else with this years ago, and it was before I was really teaching, so I didn't write down the settings, and I could never replicate it, even though that was also an impression. So let's say how we use one of these textures. So I'm going to close the original two, and we're going to open up an image. And this is an image I've edited, and I thought, a little more color in there might, give it a little more of an antique look. So I'm going to bring in the JPEG version. We'll open it and I'll drag it in. We'll use the Move tool, separate it, click, hold, drag, and you can always close the original once you get it in here. And then we'll just make it. This picture was already sized smaller. What's that, dear? fbrushes.com, yes, was the other one. So we have the texture over our image. We're going to change this blending mode to multiply. And I brought the opacity down just a little bit to 85%. So you can see there's the before and there's the after. I liked what it did on the paper especially. It really had the most effect on the lighter areas, the keys and the book. It really made it look worn and faded. So that's just one more way that you can create something and do something different. Let's see if we got some more questions. Those are the end of my projects. So as I said, as I mentioned in the beginning, for those of you who may have joined us late, if I do have, let me bring up the slide, ending slide. I also have a sale going on in the store, but first of all, if you do purchase the notes for this webinar between now and midnight Thursday Eastern Daylight Time, I will put your name in a drawing, and I will draw 2 names that will each get an hour free personal training with me. And we do it on Zoom. We can screen share. You can, ask me whether it's Photoshop or texture questions or Topaz or Luminar or whatever. If you're having a hard time with something, I can give you a hand. I do have one new set of border brushes. There's actually 15 brushes in the set. It's on sale 50% off for $7.50. And I'm retiring 12 of my older watercolor sets. And those are all on sale for The watercolors are $3 each, and there's some spiral designs that are $6 each. I'm going to show brushes again in one moment.
That was a big thing. So,
And then all of the other textures and ebooks in the store that are not already on sale, if you use the code WEB25 at checkout, you can save 25%, and this is all good until Sunday at midnight. I usually list all the affiliate links, but they're so long and I know it's hard to write them down. I will include this info in Thursday's blog, plus some Q&A for any questions we didn't get to, and I'll relist all of those websites and stuff for you. But if you go to my website and go to the info page, there's affiliate links and discounts on Topaz, Group Brushes, and Luminar. Nik, I have an affiliate link, but they don't have a discount for us. All right, if we want to load some brushes, let's do that again. So I'm going to click on my brush tool. I'm going to go up to the brush menu. And when you're in here, and this is very similar in Elements. In Elements, you'd be working in your panel at the bottom. And there's a button there that says Load Brushes. But in Photoshop, you're going to click on the gear wheel, and you're going to go to Import Brushes. And then you're going to go to wherever on your computer that you've saved it. These two are ones that I just downloaded from Photoshop that happen to be sitting in my downloads folder. I do keep a file of just brushes, and I've got a ton of stuff I need to download. So within all of these folders are the actual ABR files, but you can see there's a ton that I have here. Some I've added in, some I have not. So I'm just going to pick something. Let's check cobwebs. Since it's Halloween time, why not? So I'm just going to select that file, that row. It's the ABR file that you need to import. And you're going to click on Load. And it will add it to the bottom of your list. And there they are. Click the little arrow and that will open the folder. And we have some spiders and cobwebs and all kinds of cool stuff. So there's one for you to use in some of your creations, dear. He's been doing some Halloween things with clip art and all. So if you wanted to use a brush, and you can size it, and we'll hit black, and now we have cobwebs. So what's that, dear? The brush organizer I'm using is called Brushbox, and I really haven't gotten it set up yet, but you'll see here's the set that I just imported to Photoshop. It also added it here. But the cool thing in here, and like I said, I have not begun to really set this up, you can change the colors of these folders, you can reorganize them, you can create your own subcategories. I started to do that here. So like I would take these, let's see, which would I move? These watercolor ones, and I could move those into a watercolor folder. I haven't gotten to that point yet. I've just been busy with a lot of other things, but I did have another brush organizer, and I was not happy with it because every time they had an update, I had issues trying to get it to download, and it was a Windows thing. It wasn't their issue, but I just got tired of dealing with it. And so somebody else had recommended this one. Actually, a few people had, and it's called Brushbox. I think there was a fee. It wasn't that expensive. I can take a quick look. Let's see what it was. Brushbox.com. And you can do all kinds of cool stuff here. Let's see. Products. I don't think that's the right website. That looks weird. I'll have to double check that. I have it in the notes, but that's, well, no, I don't think that's the same one, but I'll double check that for you. But that's the name of the product. Alrighty, let's see what else we got here. Brushbox is not part of Photoshop. That is a separate plugin, and then you can add it to your little menu over here. Yes, the group brush discount is for 15%. What's that, dear?
How do you say your
how do I save my textures?
So they want to know,
Or,
file or just don't.
I need to clean my filing system of how I save my textures. A lot of what I do, I'm creating for this store, so I have those saved in a different place. But I can show you.
Gumroad.com/i/brushbox.
That's what it is. It's Gumroad. Oh, that's right. Gumroad is the company that makes it. Again, I'll post that link in the blog for you on Thursday so you guys have it. I think Dave's going to type it in to the chat right now. Oh, somebody already did. Perfect. Thanks, Darcy. So if I go into textures, it's under my photos. I have textures and backgrounds, and I have kind of a blended system. I have, a few things that I created or Dave created, and then I started doing it by the company. So I have two little Alice French Kiss Flypaper Photomorphos and a bunch of other smaller ones that I've gotten. Design Cuts, I get lots of different bundles of things from. But then I started with a lot of the odd, freebies and different things, doing it by style. So I've got artistic flowers, I've got the black and whites, cardboard, Christmas lights, chalkboards, clouds, concrete, colors. So it's kind of a blended system. It's really not ideal, and I need to reorganize this, but it's something that's, with the amount of things that I have, is going to take a very long time. So I'm kind of living with what I have for the moment. But then within a folder, I have either subfolders, or you can see different textures. And a lot of these are different freebie things that I've gotten from the various sites, and a lot of these have been listed in the blog. So if you're looking for stuff too, you can also go back through some of the old blog posts and check those for some different sites and places that you can get some freebies. Some are limited time, so they may or may not still be available. But if you go back, the last couple months, you might find some that are still available. How to add a menu on the side. I think you're talking about this menu. And these are, when you go into, let's see, I'm trying to remember how I did that. They are extensions. So all of these extensions are here. So I think once you add an extension, it automatically adds this panel. And then you can, add various ones. Here's my brush box. I have a font organizer, which I also need to get going. My group brushes, Studio Magic, other things that I use. So those will pop up over here once you open up some of those extensions. So I think I've covered most of the questions. I will go through the chat box, and if there are other things to answer, I will do that in Thursday's blog. I thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to grab your copy of the notes for today's webinar, and I will talk to you all soon. Have a great evening or morning, depending where you're located, and thanks for joining me. Have a good night.